Dara Keefe raised her hand from the back row of Conference Room B, and the silence that followed was the specific kind that fills a room before a group decides what to do with something it does not understand. Then it decided. Alex Strand was the first to react. He was 44, VP of Operations, with the particular brand of confidence that came not from being right but from never being seriously challenged long enough to find out the difference. He had a laugh that was more of a breath, controlled, almost generous in the way it suggested the situation was obviously harmless. Then the room joined him. Not everyone, but enough. Dara did not move. She was holding a manila folder against her chest, and she had a small ink stain on her left index finger from the copier on the second floor, which had been jamming since Tuesday. She was the one who had unchoked it. Nobody else in that room knew this about her. In fact, nobody in that room knew much about Dara Keefe at all, which, as it turned out, was exactly the problem they were about to have. It had started like any other Wednesday morning at Meridian Health Group. Dara arrived at 7, before the elevators filled up, before the executive assistants started their coffeeosons, before the building became the version of itself that people with corner offices preferred to see. She worked in health records and patient affairs on the 3rd floor. A department that processed incoming feedback forms, patient correspondence, and internal documentation for a regional healthcare network serving 11 counties across the Charlotte area. She had been there for 4 years. She knew every floor, every department quirk, every informal decision that got made in hallways and never reached any agenda. She knew which practice manager had been ignoring a systematic billing complaint for 8 months. She knew which community clinic was quietly running 40% over capacity while the board considered it underperforming. She knew which patient satisfaction scores were being averaged in a way that technically wasn't lying but also wasn't exactly telling the truth. She knew these things because she read everything that crossed her desk. She was not invisible because she lacked intelligence. She was invisible because the people who walked past her desk had simply never thought to wonder what she noticed. The meeting had been called by Edmund Greer, the 67-year-old CEO who had founded Meridian with 1 clinic and a business loan 38 years ago. He stood at the front of the room with the posture of someone who had earned the right not to try very hard to look impressive, and announced that he was retiring at the end of the fiscal year. The room processed this the way rooms always process that kind of news, not with shock, but with a rapid internal recalculation of who was now relevant and who had just become less so. He continued. There would be a competition, open to all staff. The winning proposal for a comprehensive community health strategy would earn its author the newly created role of Director of Community Health Strategy, reporting directly to the incoming executive team. The Palmetto Foundation had offered a $12 million grant to the First Regional Health Network to present a genuinely data-driven community outreach model. Whoever won the internal competition would lead the pitch. That was when Alex Strand, in the tone of someone extending a favor, proposed the competition be open to any employee at any level. To show this company values every voice, he swept his hand across the room in a gesture meant to look democratic and mean absolutely nothing. He had already run the numbers in his head. He knew who had a realistic chance. He knew who did not. He had not accounted for Dara Keefe, which was understandable, because he had never once looked in her direction. Her hand went up before she'd made a conscious decision. Right hand, still slightly marked from the copier ink, raised with the natural ease of someone who had spent years paying attention to things nobody asked her to pay attention to. "I'd like to submit a proposal," she said. Alex Strand's laugh was the worst kind, not cruel. Confused, the sound of someone who genuinely cannot locate a logical reason for what they are witnessing and hasn't yet decided to be threatened by it. Edmund Greer did not laugh. He looked at Dara for a long moment, the patient, unhurried look of someone building a file, and said, "Submissions due to HR by end of day Friday." Then he closed the meeting. The air on Tryon Street at 6 in the evening was that specific mix of October cool and downtown exhaust that Charlotte does in the fall. Dara was walking too fast for her own good, carrying a box of archived files she was returning to the off-site storage 3 blocks away, and she was not paying full attention to the uneven curb at the corner of 5th. The box went one way, the files went several. She crouched on the sidewalk in the middle of evening foot traffic, gathering papers with the focused expression of someone who was refusing to let this be the worst part of her day, which it would not be, because the meeting had already secured that spot. Here, a man was already down at her level, picking up papers with the efficient, unhurried motion of someone who solved immediate problems without requiring a discussion about it. Dark green fleece over scrubs, tired eyes, the specific calm of someone coming off a long shift. Dara took the papers without quite looking up. "Thank you. Sorry for the show." There was no show. He handed her the last folder. "I counted. You had maybe 8 people paying attention. 4 of them lost interest before you hit the sidewalk." She did look at him then. He seemed genuinely amused, not at her, just in general. "Congratulations," she said. "You just met the most professionally humiliated person in Charlotte." He considered this. "I work at the free clinic on Brever. The competition for that title is steep." The laugh came out before she decided to let it. Real small, slightly against her will. They stayed on that sidewalk corner for 35 minutes. She talked about her day without naming the company, or the position, or the man who had laughed. He listened without interrupting, without offering advice, without trying to fix anything before she'd finished saying it. At some point he said, not as a line, just as a thing that was true, "The most useful people I've ever met don't have the biggest titles." Dara didn't answer right away. She thought about it later, walking back to her car. She thought about the room full of VPs and department heads, about the laughter that hadn't been mean but had been worse than mean because it had been automatic. And she thought about how the only thing that had sounded like someone seeing her clearly had come from a stranger who didn't know what floor she worked on. She didn't know his name, he hadn't asked for hers. They'd said goodbye the way people sometimes do when something has been said that doesn't need a follow-up. His name was Jonah. She'd find that out the next morning. She needed coffee before she could be a reasonable person, and the place on the corner of Tryon and 6th opened at 6:30, which was the only reason she used it. She was halfway through ordering when a voice behind her said, "You look better than yesterday." He was at a table near the window, a half-eaten pastry in front of him still in the green fleece. "That's a low bar," she said. "It's an honest one," he gestured at the empty chair across from him. She took her coffee and sat at the next table over. He looked at the empty chair between them. Was that intentional? "I haven't had coffee yet." "So yes. So I'm not responsible for anything I say." He considered this with apparent seriousness. Jonah Hartley, physician, community medicine. Dara Keefe, health records, Meridian Health Group. She took a sip. 4 years. I know every complaint, every internal report, every decision that looked good on paper and fell apart in the field. And yesterday I raised my hand to lead a strategy competition and an entire room of executives laughed at me. What did you do? Kept my hand up until they finished. Jonah looked at her for a moment. Good. The coffee went cold. Neither of them noticed until it was too late to do anything about it. Before continuing, if you were in that room, would you have raised your hand knowing the whole room might laugh? Drop your answer in the comments, and at the end of the story, come back and give Dara's journey a score from 0 to 10. By 9:30 the next morning, the entire 4th floor administrative wing knew that the woman from Health Records had officially submitted a candidate application. By 10, a group chat existed. Dara didn't know what it was called. She wasn't sure she wanted to. She was reshelving intake forms on the 3rd floor when 2 operations analysts walked past, voices low but not low enough. She put her actual employee ID on the form, like officially. Alec's going to make the next 6 weeks very interesting. Dara kept shelving at exactly the same pace. She reached into her cardigan pocket and took out her composition notebook. Small, navy blue, the pages soft from regular use, and wrote down 2 names. Then she put it away and kept working. The composition notebook had been with her since the first month. She used it to record things that didn't have an official place to go. Patient feedback themes pointing to systemic gaps. Complaint patterns that repeated across departments. Operational inefficiencies that looked minor in isolation and substantial when mapped together. It was not a formal document. It was simply what she did with what she noticed. Alec found her in the hallway the following afternoon. He stopped when he saw her, smiled with a margin of effort that made the smile worse than no smile at all. "Dara," he said, "I want to make sure you understand what you're walking into. The other proposals will have full departmental support, consultants, historical data access. What is it that you bring to this?" She looked at him with the calm of someone who had been practicing this particular patience for 4 years. Access to every complaint, satisfaction survey, and field observation filed in this network since 2021. Direct knowledge of where the data and the official reports don't match, and 4 years of watching decisions get made without the people most affected by them in the room. She picked up her folder. "But thank you for your concern." She left. He stayed in the hallway with his hands in his jacket pockets. 2 days later, Dara was in a stakeholder prep meeting. Not as a candidate, but because her department had been asked to pull current patient correspondence volumes. She had the cart, she had the files. She sat in the corner the way she always sat in corners. Alec presented his concept, a premium outreach model targeting insured, upper-income demographics in the outer metro ring. Aspirational language, polished slides, the kind of thing that looked impressive to people who had not read the intake files. Blythe Connors, Director of Strategic Communications and Alec's closest ally in most things that mattered to Alec, backed it up with projected engagement numbers. "The Palmetto Foundation responds to bold vision," she said. "We position Meridian as the network for families who want the best." The room nodded. Dara raised her hand. The energy shifted the way it shifts when something unexpected tries to enter a conversation that considered itself finished. "Just a question," she said. "What percentage of Meridian's current patient population falls in the income bracket this proposal is targeting?" Blythe looked at her with the expression of someone noticing a detail they'd decided wasn't worth the effort, now reconsidering. "The intake data from the last 3 years shows 61% of our patients are below 250% of the federal poverty level," Dara continued. 37% are on Medicaid or uninsured. The 11 counties we serve include 4 of the highest rural poverty rates in the state. She looked at the slides. "A premium positioning campaign tells the people who already use this network that it isn't built for them." Silence. "The Palmetto Foundation's own grant criteria prioritize health equity and underserved populations." Page 4 of their application guidelines. Someone in the back said, "Do you have those numbers documented?" "All of them. Standard intake summaries. 3rd floor, filing cabinet 7, the last 3 annual sets." Blythe recovered first. "Thank you for the input," she said, smooth, professional, and storing everything for later. Dara picked up her cart and walked out. Behind her, she heard Alex say quietly to the person beside him, "Where did she get that data?" And she heard the reply, "From reading it." That evening, on the bench near the fountain on North Tryon, she told Jonah the broad shape of what had happened without naming the organization. "You quoted their own grant criteria from memory," he said. "I read the document twice. I wrote the key points in my notebook." "Dara, that's not a normal thing people do." "It's what the information required." He looked at her sideways. "That is the most quietly terrifying sentence I've heard since boards." "Write it down." He didn't have a notebook. She handed him a pen. He wrote it on a napkin from his jacket pocket. She took the napkin and tucked it into her coat. They stayed until the fountain lights came on. She arrived Monday morning to find a system notification. Certain candidate project folders had been affected by a weekend migration. Some files may need to be re-uploaded. Walt Osman, the 61-year-old senior records coordinator who had worked at Meridian since it was a single-building clinic on Brookshire, was at her desk before she'd finished reading. "Check your candidate folder," he said. She checked. Of 53 files she'd organized over 6 weeks, 38 were gone. Walt set a printed IT access log on her desk. Sunday night, 10:47 p.m. An administrator-level credential had accessed the candidate directory and deleted 38 files from her folder. No other candidate's folder had been touched. "Whose credential?" she asked. Walt pointed to the username at the top. "Blythe Connors." Dara held that for 4 full seconds. Then she opened her composition notebook and wrote 2 columns, what they took and what they couldn't touch. The first column was short. The second was longer, because every conversation she'd had, every clinic manager, every community health worker, every patient advocate she'd interviewed in person, lived in dated handwritten entries and in her own memory, which was not a shared server anyone could log into at 11 on a Sunday night. She rebuilt what she could. She contacted sources directly. 3 of them confirmed their conversations with her in writing, with dates. On Thursday of that same week, she was restocking supply carts on the executive floor when she slowed near the half-open door of the corner conference room. Edmund Greer's voice, and Alex Strand's. "The data points to a clear gap in community-based preventive care for working-class families," Alec was saying with the smooth confidence of someone who had rehearsed, particularly in the 4 rural counties with elevated poverty indices. "A field-based outreach model, Neighborhood navigators, mobile screening, employer partnerships. That's the model the Palmetto Foundation is looking for. I spent the last month in the intake data. Edmund's voice. How did you develop the community index framework? Direct analysis, Alex said, original framework. Dara stood in the hallway with both hands on the cart handle. Every number, every structure, every conclusion. Hers, reorganized into his sentences, being presented to the only man whose judgment mattered. She went back to the elevator. She went to the 3rd floor. She cleaned out the break room coffee station because the tray hadn't been wiped in 4 days and someone needed to do it. Walt found her there. He used my framework, she said. I know. Edmund believed him. For now. She looked at the notebook on the table where she'd set it. How do I prove it's mine when he'll claim he developed the same conclusions independently? Walt was quiet. Who did you interview? In the field. 7 clinic managers, 4 community health workers, 2 patient advocates. Did any of them speak with Alex Strand? No. Are they willing to say so in writing? She opened the notebook to the list of names. The formal complaint from Alec arrived 2 days later, posted to the HR system. Irregular conduct by candidate during selection process, 14 lines. Dara counted 3 factual errors in the first paragraph alone and reached 14 total by the end. She wrote all 14 down. Then she went to the 12th floor. Edmund Greer's assistant, Paulette, who had been with him for 16 years and could make a scheduling conflict materialize with the quiet precision of a natural event, looked at Dara's badge, looked at the folder, looked at the badge again. Then she picked up the phone. Mr. Greer, there's someone from Patient Affairs here. A pause. Yes, sir. She hung up. Go ahead. Dara set the folder on Edmund's desk. Inside, the IT access log with Blythe's credentials. 38 deleted file names with timestamps, her field interview notes with dates and contact information, 3 written confirmations from sources who had spoken only with her, her composition notebook entries photographed page by page. Edmund did not interrupt once. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Why did you wait this long? I needed the work to be worth the fight first. He paged through the folder slowly, the framework Alec presented. He copied it from my deleted files. The original structure is in that notebook. I can show you the entry dates. Edmund closed the folder. The notice is suspended. I'll have IT pull the full system audit. She turned to leave. Miss Keefe. She stopped. The ventilation problem in the east corner of the 4th floor cafeteria. Engineering has had a work order on it for 3 months. I filed an internal notice 8 weeks ago, routed it through the facility's mailbox. I know. He looked back at her folder. I've been reading the facility's mailbox. She stood there for 1 beat longer than was necessary. Then she walked out. She was still in the hallway, still processing when the elevator opened. Jonah stepped out. Jonah Hartley, in a jacket and collared shirt, looking slightly more composed than she had ever seen him. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He went completely still. She looked at him. She looked at the executive floor around her. She looked at Paulette at her desk, who waved at Jonah with the unhesitating warmth of someone who had known him since he was much shorter. He's waiting, Paulette said. Jonah looked at Dara. He opened his mouth. You're his son, Dara said, not a question. You work here, he said, also not a question. The two of them stood in the hallway in the specific silence of people who have just realized that one significant piece of information has been absent from every conversation they've ever had. Hartley is your mother's name, she said. Greer seemed like a reason to never have a normal conversation with anyone in this building, he said. I didn't know it was your building. I said I worked at a regional health network. I thought you meant the hospital system across town. Dara looked at the closed door of Edmund Greer's office. She looked at Jonah in his good jacket. She looked at the hallway she had just walked out of. I need to think, she said. I understand. The elevator arrived. She got in. He stayed in the hallway. The doors closed between them. She didn't go to the bench that night. He texted once the following morning. She replied 3 words, not yet, processing. He waited. The final presentation was on a Friday in the main auditorium. Every department had been notified. The Palmetto Foundation's regional director would be present. Edmund Greer sat in the front row with the posture of someone who had built all of this and was about to pass it on. Dara arrived early and set up her own materials. 3 printed handouts, and her composition notebook. Alec presented third. He was composed, prepared, confident in the way of someone who believed the outcome was already arranged. He presented the community outreach framework with the certainty of authorship. The room responded well. It was a good framework. It was her framework. When it was Dara's turn, she walked to the center of the room without notes in her hands. "Before I begin," she said, "I have one question for Mr. Strand." The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something unscheduled is about to happen. "Can you tell me the name of the clinic manager at our Dorita Road satellite location?" Alec looked at her. His expression did not change, which was itself an expression. "You don't have to answer now," Dara said. "Her name is Ruth Pressman. She's been there 11 years. She has a waiting list of 112 patients for primary care. I sat with her for 2 hours on a Tuesday evening in September, and she told me that the thing her patients ask for most isn't faster appointments or newer equipment. It's someone who comes to where they are instead of asking them to come to where we are." She opened the notebook. "I have that conversation dated and documented. Ruth will confirm it in writing. She never spoke to anyone else from this organization about the framework I built around that conversation." She looked up. "I also have the IT access log showing 38 files from my candidate folder were deleted using Blythe Connors's administrator credentials on the Sunday before last, and 17 files transferred to Mr. Strand's personal project folder that same evening, 3 days before the submission deadline." She set the printed log on the table beside the podium. Blythe Connors stood up. Walt Osman, who had slipped in through the side entrance at some point during the presentation and was standing near the door with a folder and no particular urgency, said, "Legal would like a word first, Miss Connors." Blythe sat back down. Alec said, "This is an inappropriate use of." Edmund Greer said, "Sit down, Alec." The room went still. Dara presented for 11 minutes. She did not rush. She had rebuilt what was taken from her, and built it better the second time, because the second time she knew exactly which parts mattered, and which were only there for people who needed convincing. The framework was direct. Neighborhood navigators embedded in community institutions rather than clinic buildings. Mobile screening units scheduled around shift change hours for hourly workers. Employer partnership agreements that brought onboarding health screenings to people who couldn't take afternoons off. All of it sourced from 11 real conversations with the people who would use it. The last line on her final slide read, "A health network that understands the people it serves will outlast any network that only imagines them." The Palmetto Foundation's regional director applauded before most of the room did. Then Edmund Greer stood up. He looked at the room for a moment, not dramatically, just taking it in, and said, with the plainness of someone naming something that had already been true for longer than this moment, "The new Director of Community Health Strategy at Meridian Health Group is Dara Keefe." After, she found a quiet stretch of hallway near the stairwell and stood with her back against the wall, not shaking, not crying, just letting the noise of the room settle somewhere outside of her. Walt appeared. He squeezed her shoulder once, said nothing, and kept walking. Edmund Greer found her 20 minutes later and brought her back to his office. "The anonymous suggestions," she said before he could begin. He nodded. He opened a desk drawer and placed a folder in front of her. It was old, the kind of folder opened many times over many years. Inside, a printed stack of emails, no sender name, sent from rotating personal addresses to the executive contact form. She recognized the phrasing of the first one immediately. She had written it 2 years before she was hired. She had found the public contact form on the website and used it because there was nowhere else for the information to go. 6 years, she said. The second one was about intake redundancies. We restructured the entire intake process 18 months later based on that note. This one, he turned to the third page, helped us catch a billing irregularity that would have cost $2 million in a federal audit. Dara held the folder carefully. "You never said anything. You were anonymous. You could have found me." "Yes," he looked at the window, "but if I'd promoted you on the basis of who you were rather than what you proved you could do, every step you took afterward would carry an asterisk. You needed to build this case yourself, and you did." She was quiet for a moment. "How did you know the notes were mine?" "Your father," he said it simply. He wrote the same way, precise, no wasted words. He noticed what everyone else stepped over. A pause, measured but not heavy. "He was my chief operations analyst for 6 years before he got sick. The The best person I've worked alongside in nearly 4 decades. When you joined the records team and I saw your name on the intake roster, I looked up your file." He met her eyes. "I've been reading your anonymous notes since long before you arrived here." She looked at the stack of emails. 6 years of letters sent into silence she had always assumed was indifference. "He would be very proud of you," Edmund said, not as a comfort, as a fact he was sharing. She opened her composition notebook, wrote one line on a clean page, closed it. She found Jonah that evening near the fountain on North Tryon. He was on the bench, not because they'd arranged it, just because it was the place that was theirs without either of them having formally decided to make it that. She sat down next to him, not with the deliberate distance of 2 weeks ago, just next to him. "Edmund told me," he said. "He told me too," she said, "some things I didn't know." They sat without talking for a while. The October air did what October air in Charlotte does. "Are you going to put me on the list?" he asked eventually. She looked at him. "What list?" "The one for things that went differently than you expected." She opened the composition notebook. Near the front she kept a short column of things she'd gotten wrong, assumptions that hadn't held, judgments she'd had to revise. She wrote his name. Under it she wrote, "Expected nothing, got everything." She closed the notebook. "That is simultaneously the most romantic thing anyone has ever done to me," Jonah said, "and the most frightening. I cannot decide which." "Both," she said, "that's the honest answer." He reached over and took her hand the way he did most things, without announcement, without requiring the moment to mean something out loud before it was ready. She held on. The fountain ran. Charlotte moved around them, indifferent and constant and completely unaware of the last 6 weeks of her life. She didn't need it to be aware. That had never been the point. In her first weeks as director, Dara implemented 2 operational changes and drafted a third. The third was a formal anonymous suggestion channel, a real one, with a dedicated review process and a required quarterly response, so that anyone who noticed something important would never again have to wonder if it had disappeared into a general inbox and been forgotten. Walt found out through the all-staff announcement. He read it twice. He made himself a cup of coffee in the third-floor break room, the one with the tray that was always clean now, and sat with it for a minute. He thought about Dara Keefe, who had arrived 4 years ago, with a Navy notebook and a willingness to pay attention to things no one had ever asked her to notice. He thought about how long she'd been right about things before anyone was ready to hear it. Then he sent her a message. 3 words, "Your father's daughter." She replied in under a minute, "Learning from the best." He smiled, set his phone down, drank his coffee and got back to work, because some things don't need any more words than the ones that have already been said.